to the one who helped most of all. What are these, so withered and wild in their attire? But they look not like inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on't.
I first attempted the Pennine Way with Warren, a good friend from school, at the age of 16, if memory serves me right. It must have been the summer of 1978. I'd seen the BBC programme Go with Noakes, The Walk Will Do You Good, and I was inspired to follow in the great band's footsteps. Warren's dad drove us up from our homes in Walsall, near Birmingham, and dropped us off in Edale, the southernmost tip of the path. I only had a dim recollection of the weather on the day, but I remember it being bright and sunny when we arrived, glistening with the freshness of recent rain. After walking through the village, we began to follow the acorn-marked finger signs. We were wearing and carrying heavy 1970s gear we'd mostly borrowed from relatives, and we had little idea of how to read a map. After a confident ascent of Grinsbrook, I clearly remembered the rude awakening of slogging through the cloughs and grikes of the Kinderscout Plateau. No flagstones then, and the hardship that was greatly amplified by the weight of my canvas rucksack that soon became sodden with fresh rain. I remember a night spent camping just off the Snake Pass, our first encounter with midges, a buzzing cloud with a million biting mouthparts.
The first time I walked a bit of the Pennine Way, it was with my friend Nicholas. It was summer, 1981. We'd been students together and we made friends after that, about 3 years after we'd graduated. We were both teachers. Nick said, "Why not walk a bit of the Pennine Way?" And I said, "Great, why not?" Although I'd done anything like that before. Obviously I walked in the countryside. I think I'd been up to Snowdon one time. Not a great walk, and that this sounded like a good challenge. We decided the section we'd do. We started in Hawes and we walked as far as Dufton. We spent 5 days on it. But we backpacked the whole way, carrying our own stuff. And it was just a great experience, really good. It was tough. We were carrying everything and it was all-style kit. We were tired at the end of the day. We'd taken our dehydrated food for cooking. We'd have our camping meal and then go to the pub and have a basket meal. And some nights we'd get 2 basket meals. We certainly consumed a lot of calories on that trip. We ended up in pubs last night with people who are walking with you, or we're in a pub where you might expect to see walkers. We were in one pub, the Farmer's Arms, in Mooker, just round from Keld. Nick had just been up to order the second round of beers, and the barman says, "Ah, right, you're doing the Pennine-ghent, are you?" Clearly a way of drumming up business, and I think we'd managed to gather in between us that night, just to keep the barman happy. That was in 1981. Later in the evening, 2 elderly gentlemen came in. They were both dressed in dinner jackets. One of them had a white dinner jacket, and clearly they were dressed up for the occasion of the royal wedding. One of them looked a lot like Wilfred Hyde White, the actor, if you remember who he was. Other than that, it was great. We had lots of people going along. There were lots of conversations. People were always friendly and chatty. In 1981, we did course to Dufton. They would have careers, have family. Then they all grew up. And we were having a beer one time, and Nick said, "Well, why don't we finish it off?" So, we went to do the first part again. This time, it was 2016, and went from Edale and walked to Hawes. The intention then being, in a year's time, to go to Dufton and finish it off to Kirkyeton. But we enjoyed it so much that we thought, actually, we now need to go back and do the whole thing. And so, in 2017, we walked from Hawes to the bit beyond Dufton, the bit past Garrigal, or past Hadrian's Wall. And then we were going to do the rest of it in 2018, but unfortunately McAllister's mother passed away, and we had to postpone it to 2019. Then we went back and finished it, and we got to Kirkyeton. Just then, at 16, we were that much older. We weren't carrying backpacks. We carried our day packs and stuff we needed for the day, with Nick's wife backed us up with the car and the tent. We drove to Edale and started walking. It was quite a different experience to what we'd had before. We noticed that a lot of the path had been set with flagstones. They hadn't been flagged when we'd walked that way many years before. Kyoda, Nick's wife, had been talking to the guy running the campsite, and he'd been telling her, oh, people get into trouble up there, people not turning up, falling into ditches, and anybody was full of stories, and she was getting quite worried. Setting off from Crowden the next morning, we saw a couple of young lads that we'd seen in the distance the day before. And as we drew close, one of them said, there's something wrong. And he showed me his compass, and somehow he reversed the polarity. So north was pointing south, etc. And he couldn't work it out. So, knowing a little bit about how compasses work, I managed to get the polarity back. He'd clearly had it too close to his mobile phone. We walked with him for a bit, came across him a few times over the next few days.
I remember the immense kindness of the woman at the farm we camped at near Todmorden. She wouldn't accept payment for the dinner. I think we must have looked half-starved and pitiful after our moorland ordeal.
It was very blowy, very windy where we camped up. I can't remember where, but I had a tent, a reading ice tent. I took the fly sheet off and I thought I'd still get it pegged into the ground before I took the poles out. At that point, a gust of wind blew my tent about 50 feet in the air, over a little cliff and down into a bog on the other side of where we were camping. Fortunately, it stopped at that point and I was able to scramble down and get it. I looked like an absolute amateur. People were looking around, schoolboy error. I hadn't realised how windy it was.
Poles, waymarkers, just visible in the mist of memory. Black moss and white moss, featherbed moss.
There is a good Lancashire word that well describes the conglomerate ooze and mud and mire of featherbed moss. This word is slutch. Say it slowly, with feeling, and you have the sound of the boot extricating itself from the filthy stuff. Slutch.
We camped near Haworth, and I made a silly video imitating Kate Bush running across the wild and windy moor towards my mate Kath, who just ignored me entirely.
That's, I suppose, the thing about the Pennine Way. It opens up all the way along. There's a story and narrative that you can get involved in and enjoy. From there, we walked towards Skipton. I remember camping there at Skipton. We went into Skipton, and it was a Saturday. They have races nearby. Lots of people in town who had clearly been to the races all day, and I don't know why, but lots of people have luggage labels tied onto their jackets. But they did, and it was very busy and very lively.
I remember approaching Malham through fields of grassy drumlins, basket of eggs, post-glacial topography.
Next day we walked to Malham, which is an easy walk, very gentle walking, up the river valley, until you get to Malham itself, and you walk up the side of the cove to make the clints and grikes on the top. Around Malham Tarn and beyond, and then you're heading off towards Pen-y-ghent, and the top part of that is quite a scramble, but it's something that people do. They go and park their cars, and they walk up the big hill.
I got as far as Horton in Ribblesdale before my feet gave up as a result of terrible blisters, a distance of 93 miles. I resolved to never walk in borrowed boots again. Since then I have walked various stages of the Pennine Way with more comfortable kit, and I've met many memorable people and enjoyed many diverting conversations along the way.
And I remember that there was this family group in front of us. We had to wait a while for them to negotiate this scramble. Quite a large guy in flip-flops. It was worrying me somewhat as to what he was doing, and at the same time there were all these youngsters who were clearly running the 3 peaks, and they would scramble up by the side of you and suddenly they were gone, and you get to the top and you just see them disappearing off into the distance, legging it down the side of the hill. Really brought it home that anyone can really have a go and enjoy any bit of it. And while I think the person that flip-flops was incredibly foolish, I don't begrudge him the desire to enjoy it, like anyone else.
After that, we came into Hawes and we came across those 2 guys, and they were using walking poles and they were running. It wasn't normal walking, they were actually physically running. A bit further along, they'd stopped. One of them was resting because he had a really bad leg. And it turns out that they were in the army. And this is what they do for fun. They'd have some time off and run the Pennine Way. The guy who had hurt his leg was intent on running as fast as he could to spend less time putting pressure on his bad leg. So, that was 2016. Rolling on to 2017, back to Hawes, and we were camping near Keld. Then we went back to the Father's Arms. We'd been there in years past, during our first attempt in 1981. We didn't have the Pennine Gallon this time, not even between us, because times have changed. To have the same feel, it was lovely to be there and to think back to all those years previously. Yeah, and then we walked on, and from that point the next stop I think would have been Middleton in Teesdale. Not too much to remember from that.
Complicated route finding. Follow the map closely.
The following day, we walked on to Langdon Beck, and this time, because we're wealthy people now, we stopped in the Langdon Beck Hotel, rather than camping on the edge of the field. It was very different. I couldn't recognise it as the place we'd visited in 1981, but it was called the Langdon Beck Hotel, so it must have been the same place. And I was intrigued to see that there was a geology museum inside the hotel itself. One little room that was called the Langdon Beck Geology Museum, dedicated to the memory of the previous landlord. You can go in there if you like and look at rocks, perhaps some fluorite from local mines, if I remember correctly. And then the following day was a little walk, and then the walk up to High Cup Nick, which is just the most amazing U-shaped valley you will ever come across. And you just get up there and take it in and, well, having been a teacher, geography teachers get very excited about U-shaped valleys, so I made a little film clip for them and posted it on Instagram because it was just so phenomenal. So, the next day the weather had cleared and we walked from Garrigill to Dufton across Cross Fell, the wrong way if you like, but the weather was great. Going across the top, I remember there was one of those little huts that you can go in as a refuge or bothy. Greg's Hut, I think it's called, the highest bothy in England. We'd gone in there and it was quite interesting. And then right at the top it was very, very boggy and the path was set with flagstones. But the flagstones had sunk below the water, so you could walk along the flags and it looked like you were walking on water, which managed to amuse my son, who had joined us that day. And now we're at the last section, which we walked in 2019. And we walked up Hadrian's Wall, past one of the garrisons, and up along it to the high point at Windshields. Hadrian's Wall is just amazing. You come to the places where the soldiers were stationed, and it's incredible to think it's still there.
We came across Sycamore Gap. I didn't know about it then, but of course everyone knows about it now. Back then I imagine locals did, or anyone walking the Pennine Way would have known about it. The symmetry of it absolutely struck me. I looked in the guide and it did mention it. The sycamore tree had just grown to fit the gap, because that's what nature does. It grows into space, and it was absolutely stunning. And then from there you walk down and off across the moor.
Gird up your loins as they have never been girded up before.
It's a long walk off from there, and we spent a bit of time with the guy who was walking from Land's End to John O'Groats. He was struggling a bit because he hadn't had a good night the night before, and he was struggling to find places to buy food. So we were able to help him out a little bit. He was a doctor, and he was doing it for a mental health charity. He worked in mental health. He'd taken a sabbatical several months in order to do this. The more we talked to him, the more we thought the walk was for his mental health as much as the charity. It was on that section that we came across one of those places at the side of a farm with a sign that said, "Come on in, help yourself to a drink and get something to eat and make a donation." And you don't see a lot of those on the Pennine Way, but there was this one, and we were able to make use of it, which was quite nice. You do see them quite a lot in other parts of the world, on the Caminos, for example. People just give you hospitality, and you don't even make a donation. After that, we're heading north towards Cleveland, and it's quite barren and rugged up there, and there are less places to stop. And we get to the next place, which is somewhere near Bellingham, and I think we did camp there. After that, we're up to Burness, and we did stay there. And the next section to Kirk Yetholm was kind of too far for us in a day. So what we did, we walked half the way, and then we walked off the hill and got picked up and went to stay in a pub in Kirk Yetholm. Then the next day we went back and walked the last section. And you joined us there, Paul.
Can you remember anything about that day, Jules? Because I think it would be nice, and it might connect with my own story.
So we spent the night in the pub in Kirk Yetholm, and there was a young American guy. He'd been sleeping in his tent on the grass outside the hostel where we'd stayed in Burness. And he'd walked our way. He'd done the whole of the Pennine Way, and whereas we'd taken 3 weeks to get it, these taken 8 journeys. Phenomenal effort. But then, talking to people, you realise that some people run out and they would do it in incredibly short periods of time. And so the next day we drove back, got back on the hill, and as you say, you joined us there, Paul, and the rain was absolutely physical. It just poured down. The visibility was not great, and there were places where it seemed you could feel the clouds coming up into your face. And then we'd slowly come down into Kirk Yetholm, and the weather cleared, and it was glorious. And we were recounting all the things we had done along the way, rough calculations of how many pork pies we'd eaten, and so on. And it was a phenomenal finish.
Stop. This is the end. You have walked the Pennine Way.
There was that group there.
A couple of brothers and lugger guy, Mary. They were going to do it in the other direction, very incredibly enthusiastic about it.
They were also incredibly enthusiastic about drinking, if I remember.
Yes, we didn't see them at breakfast the following morning, but maybe they set off very early. The Pennine Way is such an iconic walk. I had no idea that it's been designated as a footpath since 1965. It seems to have always been there. It's etched in your mind. But it opens things up. For me, I now do much more walking than I ever did when I do proper long-distance footpaths. The couple of Caminos that are 500 miles in one stretch, carrying everything with you on the way. And I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't walked the Pennine Way. It wasn't in my consciousness as something I wanted to do. So it's a wonderful thing.